For centuries, the Rapa Nui went unexposed to external influence and developed unique cultural traditions unseen elsewhere. But as their isolation ended, new cultures were introduced, and so began a slow dilution of old customs. As we continue our special on Easter Island, we look at how today's Rapa Nui children are reclaiming their identity by learning their own language and renewing long-lost traditions.
A history class at the Hangaroa Primary School. Lessons here, paid for by the Chilean government, are partly in Rapa Nui. The language of these children's great-grandparents was almost lost, and even now most Rapa Nui people tend to speak Spanish at home.
20
to 25 years ago, the language was seriously threatened. Every day, fewer children, fewer people were using the language. Language is what gives us our identity, as a race, as Polynesians, as Rapa Nui. How a child understands its world is affected by the language it speaks. They lose this if they stop speaking the language of their own people, of their own race.
Children here used to be given exactly the same curriculum as those on the Chilean mainland, but now lessons are adapted to make them more relevant. So this is the geography lesson. And this, the art class. It's all designed to give these children a better understanding of who they are and where they came from. It seems to be working. But there is perhaps an even bigger challenge for those trying to preserve the culture and viability of this island. Easter Island has long been seen as a parable of what happens when the impact of human beings on the environment crosses a tipping point. When the original settlers arrived here, 70% of the land was covered by trees. All were cut down, destroyed by fire, or unable to reproduce because rats the Polynesians brought with them on their canoes ate the tree's seeds. The deforestation caused drought, soil erosion, and social upheaval. Life on the once abundant island became unsustainable. Now a project is underway to preserve what's left and attempt to recreate at least something of that lost paradise. At this nursery, some of the plants being grown are actually not indigenous, but they are the same species which the first king of the Rapa Nui brought with him on 3 canoes all the way from Polynesia.
Inside his boat, there were 3 boats, as well as his family and other Polynesian people. There were plants. We even know the names that they gave the plants, which are the same as the ones we use. They came not just with trees, but with seeds and cuttings. And they also brought animals, such as chickens, for food.
Some plants, like this one, it's thought were brought because they were used to wash clothes.
We are trying to conserve the species. By that I mean, we go to the places where the original settlers found them, or retrieve the genetic material from the specimens which the original explorers took to botanical gardens in Latin America, Europe, and Australia, to recreate the lost species.
The plants are grown here and then replanted across the island. The dream is to recreate everything as it once was, although the clock cannot be entirely turned back.
It won't be exactly the same as before. For example, the endemic palms won't be here as they are now extinct. The native sandalwood is also extinct. But we can create something very similar and make it self-sustaining. It's a dream of mine and many other people.
But there is a new threat to the island's sustainability, and that's its visitors. The global market for those wanting to travel to formerly out-of-the-way places is growing fast. The airport could easily cope. It is officially the most remote in the world, but also plenty long enough for all commercial jets. It was extended in the 1980s by NASA when it was designated as a possible emergency Pacific landing spot for the space shuttle. But less high-tech are the island's sewage arrangements. There is no sewage processing here. Another problem is that the archaeological remains themselves are extremely fragile. James Grant Peterkin, a British academic who lives on Easter Island, says that the time for limiting the number of tourists here is approaching.
The island itself is an ecosystem that's very fragile, so any kind of too much pressure on those very few resources will of course have catastrophic results for the island and the future of the island. Current studies say that they can cope with up to 100,000, they think, a year. And so, as we haven't yet reached that point, the local government or Chilean government has yet to had to make a big decision regarding limiting the amount of people. Certainly there are environmental risks with many more people arriving on this island. The most basic one is drinking water, of course, which comes from underneath the island. So there's reservoirs of drinking water that we're using today. That's fine when it's still pure water, but of course with no sewage system and things like that, you get a sudden increase in pollution in that water and you're facing a very serious risk in terms of survival for the islanders here on Rapa Nui.
So is anything being done to solve this problem? To find out more, we went to speak to the mayor of Easter Island. He is Rapa Nui, but technically a Chilean government employee. He's also an investor in a hotel on the island. He's the first to admit that his position is somewhat complicated.
This is Chilean territory, but our wishes sometimes don't coincide with Chilean laws. Of course, we want to protect and look after the island as much as possible, but there are Chilean laws which apply to this territory which we need to respect.
By that, he means that this is officially a regular province of Chile, and there are no restrictions on the movements of Chileans within their own country, even though this part is almost 2,500 miles from the mainland.